Good evening.
Good evening.
Let us just move these out of the way. What about half-souls? Are we not complete within ourselves? Well, actually, I never heard of half-souls, so I can't answer that question. I don't know what it means or what they are. I've never heard the term before. How do we release our loved ones? Well, actually, we don't release them. We don't release them. If we understand what we're doing, we hold them in a relationship from which they can never escape, nor can we. This probably means, how do we release them from our fears? One can answer that quickly by saying that a conviction of God would be sufficient, because we only fear for our loved ones because we have no conviction that there is a God. We have no faith in God. The reason we have no faith in God is that we've never had an experience, and so we're not sure that there is a God. Let us always be willing to face ourselves with our own lacks and limitations, and then we will know how and in what direction we can grow. Now, no one has ever had faith in God and feared for their loved ones. It is only in the absence of a God, in the absence of a conviction that there is a God. This is understandable. In the human picture, there is not too much evidence that there is a God. When we witness man's inhumanity to man, it makes us wonder where this God is. As we have witnessed in the last 40 years, the slaughter of the very best of our youth in these wars, knowing full well that not one of those wars ever had a reason to be. They just represented man's brutality, man's ignorance of human relationships, man's failure to comprehend the world we live in. None of these wars have one single bit of excuse, because each one of them was fought alone for money, for business. In none of the wars that have taken place in my lifetime has there been an ideal or an idea to fight for. Money was that which was fought for, land, property. And that is what this present unrest is about. More land, more property, more money, more oil. Not an ideal anywhere in any of these wars. And remember this, that I stood on a street in London in 1909 when the first sign of a coming world war took place. And from that moment on, every one of us who was in international business knew that the war was going to take place, only missing was the date. And as a matter of fact, on December 31st, 1913, we received officially the word that the war would take place sometime in the spring or summer of 1914. There was nothing idealistic about it. It was trade, nothing more than trade. And those who brought out such slogans as for Christianity and for democracy were just about as vicious as those who brought out the same slogans in the last war. Nothing but man's inhumanity to man, corruption, money, property, has been at the bottom of these wars. And most of the wars that have been fought in all time have either had money or church behind them. Rarely has a war been fought for an idealistic principle. Now, when you view that, you wonder, where is God? When you witness what Russia has done with its prisoners and with the nations that have come under it, you must wonder, where is God? When you witness what happened to the Jews in Germany, you must wonder, where is God? When you witness what is happening today to the Muslims, to the Jews, to the Christians over in Africa and in the Near East, when you witness what is happening in South Africa, you must ask yourself, where is God? And the answer has to come back, if you have the courage to face it. There's certainly no God in that scene. Now, is it any wonder then that we come to an age where we have small children and we can't release them, we can't let them out of our sight, we're afraid to trust them anywhere? When we witness these things and say, where is a protection for it? Where can they be? Now, the answer to this lies in this. You can never release your loved ones from fear, and you can never stop fearing for them as long as they are out in that world where anything may happen, and almost everything already has happened, where there is more of evil to look forward to than there is good. Now, this situation has always been. Never think for a moment that it is worse now than in the past. On the other hand, don't believe it's any better. For the same conditions exist throughout the world as existed in Egypt when the Hebrews were slaves, as existed all across the Holy Lands, all across Rome, Greece, on into Europe, when the world was really beginning to be populated. Now, as time went on, we came to an era that is called the Middle Ages. Well, those of you who are familiar with history could never have enjoyed reading that. Such a black chapter in the history of mankind. The hundreds of years of political wars, national wars, the years of wars by the churches, one upon another. Not pleasant reading. And certainly there's no pleasant reading in the history of our generation. Now, does that mean that there is no God? Does that mean that such conditions are inevitable and will always be? And the answer is no. Throughout all time, there have been men and women who were not subject to the conditions which surrounded them. Always there have been men and women able to surmount the conditions of their time and live in some measure of peace, even while all these other things were going on around them. The very ministry of the man Christ Jesus was conducted in as bad a time as this earth has seen, the heyday of Rome. The mystics of the 12th to the 17th century lived through all of the 30-year wars and 100-year wars, and above all the religious wars of Europe, and yet found a peace and a security and a way of life in the midst of all of that. The answer to all of this is that life is an individual experience, and that it only becomes a collective experience as time goes on and groups form themselves together in the spiritual relationship that I will come to in just a little while. We start, however, with an individual. That individual may be Moses. Later, that individual may be Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah. And still later, that individual is Jesus the Christ. Still later, it is Peter, John, and Paul in this particular world. Over in the other world of India, there was Gautama the Buddha and his disciples. Later on, Shankara to carry on. Still later on, Nanak, the founder of the Sikhs. In every period of life, there have been these individuals. They, through a measure of God realization, became the particular leaders, religious leaders, of their day. Just as later, Jacob Boehme, Eckhart Tolle, William Law became the leaders, William Penn, George Fox, became the leaders of their particular day, the religious leaders, and always led their people into an inner peace, an inner realization, an inner security, and the understanding that there is peace. There is the opportunity for everyone to be under that, what do we call it? The wings of the Almighty, the arms of the Almighty, so forth and so on. Now, the Master says, the way is straight and narrow, and few there be that enter. The way is straight and narrow because it has to begin with an individual. It has to spread to only 2, 4, 12, 70, 200. And always it has done just that. But now, watch this. Always the religious, and by religious I mean the mystical religious people, those who have had God revealed to them and experienced by them, these people always have been wiped out of existence by persecution. They never were strong enough to stand when persecution came. The Christians, those who followed the Master and then succeeded him to carry on the word and the work, were small in numbers. They were continuously persecuted and could operate only in small bands, and most of the time in secret, for 300 years. But they did make a progress until they were wiped out of existence in one fell swoop by the organization of the church. That brought them into line with outer worship, the following of forms and ceremonies, rather than the inner practice of conscious union with God. And that, of course, ended for several hundred years the spiritual unfoldment and demonstration of the world. Over in India, it fell by the wayside for different reasons, although organization was at the bottom of it. Because when you organize any religious teaching, you must lose the efficacy of it eventually. That has to be, and it has to be for this reason. Supposing we take our own little work here, which is not organized, and you find someone functioning as a practitioner or teacher in California, Illinois, New York, Ohio, wherever it may be. Now, I tell you this very, very candidly, each one of those people is operating through their own consciousness. They are not receiving $1 of support or one contribution or one authorization as such. They are receiving nothing of a human nature that they can depend on. Not a thing. Occasionally, someone writes from that particular neighborhood and is recommended to go and visit them, and that's as far as it goes. Nobody vouches for them. Nobody gives them a license. Nobody undertakes to finance them. And what happens? They have to succeed on their own degree of realized consciousness. Now, there's no one pushing them as to whether it takes them 1 year to succeed or 10 years, because nobody's demanding money of them. Nobody's asking them to contribute at this end. They are left completely to their own demonstration, and they can make it slowly or quickly, or, as some have already done, they can fail and drop right out of the work. That's because we are unorganized. The very moment we would be organized, it would mean that we, somewhere in some headquarters, would be backing them, financing them, helping them to stand on their feet. And the first thing you know, instead of it being a spiritual demonstration, it would be a headquarters demonstration. Now, if anyone goes out to lecture for this work, they will have to do as I have done. Find through my own consciousness the support to carry me around. That's what they will have to do. Nobody's going to pay it for them. Because the moment somebody pays it for them, they're not leaning on their consciousness, they're leaning on the check from home. So that eventually, probably not these particular ones, because they, through the beginning, have demonstrated their consciousness, but the very next ones that come along that haven't their consciousness to depend on and say, oh, I get a salary with this, and I get my expenses paid with this, and there it goes. And of course, nepotism comes in too. The very moment you have an organization, somebody has a relative who needs this job very much, or a favorite here or a favorite there, and very soon you have human beings conducting the work instead of spiritual consciousness. Now, if our work succeeds, it will succeed because each one entrusted with an activity will only be entrusted with it because in some measure they have demonstrated their spiritual consciousness and their ability to stand on it. So that it is possible that whereas we could have 100 people operating if we would just give them some support, we will only have 10 or 12 or 20, but each one of those is demonstrating the principle of God. Each one of those has something to give, something to heal with, something to teach with, something to work with. And the best of it all is they are demonstrating the principle they're talking about instead of just getting paid for talking. Now, every time that a religious teaching has come into existence, It has been organized and failed through its organization because, whereas in the beginning there was a master and disciples, there was a leader and a good group of students to carry on the work by the next generation, or the next generation had been organized, and humans carried the work around the world. I wish you, those of you who don't know, could know the miracle of the work that Vivekananda did when he came to the United States in 1893, a complete stranger, and not a person in this United States knew anything of Hinduism or any of its teachings, and that one man in a brief 5 years had a movement going from coast to coast, thriving. It isn't thriving today as much as it thrived in his day, because there isn't his consciousness behind it. The same thing was true when Mrs. Eddy's early students went out. Why, within a few years, $1 and $2 million churches were being built in a world that never heard of Christian Science. What on what? The demonstration of the healing power of those early students. Why? Because they weren't financed. Oh no, they went and had their instruction, and they went out in their realization of God and started the work. And they had to sink or swim on their own understanding. One woman whom Mrs. Eddy sent to New York tells the fact that she went with her little boy, and they engaged a bedroom for $5 a week for both of them, and that there were many weeks when she didn't have the $5 rent until Saturday morning when it was due. 10 years later, she bought and paid $2.5 million cash to put a church at 68th Street in Central Park West in New York City. See that? With what? Healing power. Her consciousness of God. Her conscious oneness with God, which she could demonstrate day by day by day. And not only she could demonstrate, but when you came to her for help, you were helped because of her attained degree of consciousness. But you could go all around the world and follow and find that same thing of that movement in its early days. One of our ladies in New York had only read Science and Health halfway through when this same woman who built this church said to her, "I think you ought to go to Germany and start the work there." There wasn't a Christian Scientist in Germany. And she said, "Well, first place, I've only read Science and Health halfway through. I don't know what it's about. And secondly, I don't speak German. Thirdly, I have no money." This lady said, "All of that makes no difference. You have a beautiful consciousness, and you can succeed with it. Start out, book your passage, and go." That woman got on a ship, and she read Science and Health on the ship on the way over to Germany. On the way, she found books on Germany, and she decided that she would go to Dresden. That would be her start. She went there and found a pension where English was spoken. And the very first night at supper, they were speaking of a vacant seat, a woman who was upstairs sick and couldn't come to dinner. Well, in one way or another, this woman caught what it was and finally asked if she could go up and pray for this woman. Oh, yes, she'd love to be prayed for. In the morning, the lady came down completely well. Well, this same lady, 2 years later, had started a church in Dresden, another one in Berlin, and went back to New York for instructions from her teacher, and our teacher recommended her to Mrs. Eddy for class instruction as a teacher. Mrs. Eddy wrote back, "I'm sorry, but the manual says you have to be a practitioner 3 years before you can become a teacher, and this lady has only been a practitioner 2 years." And then her teacher wrote back and told the history of this lady, and Mrs. Eddy wrote back and said, "For such there are no laws. Send her up." Now, I mean, that is how, when you go out with a consciousness, you have to succeed And that's the meaning of all religious teaching. It makes no difference whether it's the Infinite Way of today or any of these older ones. The secret behind them was the developing of this spiritual consciousness and what it does for one in their daily lives. Now, today, 75 years later, you don't find so many million-dollar churches being built, although the population of the world has doubled. You don't find half as many miracles as you did in those days, and there again you have the same story. When you go into a church today, one of those churches, you find the people there who are sitting and listening to everything, and then at the end of the service drop their dollar bill in. It wasn't that way with the original ones. They took every dollar they had in the world and built those edifices. They sacrificed. They had faith and confidence. They had a zeal and a devotion. It was a different type of person. Now, we come to this. No body of people who are going to sit around listening to religious talks, religious services, lectures, classes, or whatnot, is going to make their spiritual demonstration on that. There has to be an answering response within them that opens up their heart and soul and mind and body to God. That can't happen unless there is some kind of a God contact. When the God contact takes place, you not only can release your family, but if you're sent thousands of miles away, you'll go and leave them behind you. In spite of all the evil that has taken place in the history of this world, there is a God. And that God has always been available, and that God has been proved by those who had the desire to prove it and to live it. Now we, in these days, are more fortunate than those of any previous times. We live in just as wicked a world. We live in just as much evil as has ever been. But there is this much benefit for us. We do not have to go to the stake to be burned for our convictions. We don't have to be crucified. We can't be put in dungeons. We have, not only here, this is true in 3/4 of the world, we have complete freedom to follow our inclination. We have complete freedom to seek God. We have public libraries where the greatest literature ever written is all to be found by the saints and seers and sages of all ages. Nobody can keep us from the demonstration of God but ourselves. Now, God is not to be found easily. God is not to be experienced easily. God is not to be found by sitting around listening or by joining a movement. That's not the way to find God. The way to find God is, first of all, to begin the search where God is. And the kingdom of God is within you. This means that the most difficult part of the work you have to do when you're alone, in your own home, in your own office, in your own garden, when you are entirely alone, because no one can help you with it. The only help you can get is when you meet with groups like this, where all are on the same path. They can be a help in lifting you to a little higher consciousness than you otherwise could attain. Where 2 or more are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst, and it's much easier to meditate in a group like this than it is alone. So in your own communities, if you do find groups or organize groups to meet for the purpose of meditation or the study of these writings or recordings, you'll find that to be a help, but I can tell you very honestly, only a help. It isn't going to get you into heaven or God realization. That is going to be done when you're alone, when you take the wisdom that you've learned in the books or classes or recordings and then go into your own inner silence with that wisdom, ponder it, think on it, live with it, meditate, until one day or 1 year, who knows, that experience of God realization will come. From then on, you'll trust anybody with your family, and you'll trust your family with anybody. You will trust yourself, you will trust your supply, you will trust your money, your securities, everything, because you will not be leaving them at the mercy of man whose breath is in his nostril. You will be placing them in the keeping of this Spirit. Now I must show you something. If strangers came to this room, they would see a group of about 100 people. And of course, judging by appearances, each would be a separate person. Each one's interest would be their own, and each one would be on their own. But that isn't true. There's no such thing as that in this room. There couldn't possibly be. When I make my conscious contact with God, I am that instant at one with the spiritual nature of every individual on the face of the globe. I am at one with spiritual man and woman or child or animal or mineral or vegetable. You see, this world isn't what it appears to be. This isn't a world of separate people and things. This world is more like, shall we say, these Hawaiian islands. If you look at them from above, you will see there are 6 or 7 islands here. But if you go down deep enough in the water, you will find there's only one island. It's just one island, and there are 6 or 7 upward projections of that one. But they are all one, and they're united in that oneness. So with us, if you could see beneath the surface of our outer being, you would find that there is a point at which we are all united. And that point is God. That is our common ground. And we are very much like the fingers that rise up from a hand. But how are you going to separate fingers and hand? You don't. They are actually one. So that whatever takes place in this hand flows up into the fingers. You can go back further than that, all the way back till you come to the heart, and say whatever is happening in the heart is flowing up into the fingers. So with us, there is one common ground, and that common ground is God. We are merely projections or expressions or individualizations of that one. And when you get back into the inner life, when you get under the surface of the outer life, you discover. First you discover that I and the Father are one. That's your first discovery. You are not alone. You have a contact with the source of infinity. You are at one with it, and it is flowing out as your individual experience. Later, when you begin to forget yourself somewhat, in the sense that Paul means when he says, I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life, the moment you come to that realization, you pay very little attention to yourself. Your thought is out here, and with the idea of helping those who are reaching toward that light. Then you begin to perceive a strange thing. Without knowing how it can possibly be, you discover that people interested in the subject of God find their way to you. Now that's a very, very strange thing, that out of 4 billion people on the face of the earth, that there should be about 25 or 30,000 scattered all over this globe that have come to know me and I have come to know them. Isn't that strange? And isn't it another strange thing that every one of them is interested in finding God? All the others have passed me up. All the others ignore me. All the others do not know that I'm on earth. But just those who, in each case I find, is interested in God, we come to know each other. They come to know me, I come to know them, just as we here in this room have come to know each other, and there's one thing common to all of us here. We're interested in finding God. And everyone who isn't in this room. Now, that begins to work in your thought, and you say, that is funny, isn't it? Every once in a while, somebody comes to me and starts talking, and the first thing you know, we're talking about God. We're talking about truth. We're talking about the Bible, something of a spiritual nature. Later, you find another thing, that almost nobody ever seems to come into my orbit at all, unless they are interested. They come in and they go out, they come in and they go out, but they never touch my experience. And you ponder that, you think that, and you commence to see that all who are attuned in any way at all to the spiritual side of life do meet. And pretty soon it is revealed to you that it is because of my conscious oneness with God that I know you. It is because of your even the briefest contact or interest in or leading in that direction that brings you in contact with me. In other words, there is that common bond between us. You find that in the passage at the beginning, on the first page of every book, that spiritual illumination dissolves all material relationships and binds us together in a spiritual bond. Now later, you discover another thing. Things that are necessary to you in your experience gravitate to you. Things that can benefit you. Sometimes it's money. I have told the students how the tape recording started in that way, by a man bringing it to me and virtually insisting on our beginning it. And how the manuscripts came into being in the same way, by someone bringing the idea to me and insisting on trying it. And so it has been one thing after another has been brought. I never had to go out looking. It was brought into my orbit. Now, it doesn't take too many of these experiences before you begin to perceive this. It is because I am one with God, it is because I'm in tune, it is because I have made contact, that others of that same spiritual nature are being drawn to me, and the things, they must also have a spiritual contact, for they too come along. Still later, you make even a wider discovery. There isn't a man, woman, or child on the face of the globe that isn't one with God and who hasn't a spiritual center. Doesn't make any difference what kind of a villain they may be. It doesn't make any difference how deep-dyed a devil they may be. There is a spiritual spark or contact or union with God in them. It may not have come to light. It may, through the human experience, be completely lost for the time being, but it's there. And when you come to the healing work, you discover that that's what makes it possible to heal. You never break through the human opposition of people to truth. You never break through in the earliest stages of their experience. You never break through and get them to be interested in spiritual things. But if there is just that trace of it that brings them to you, and you can look apart from the human element and keep yourself centered on that one truth, my conscious union with God, my conscious oneness with God, constitutes my oneness with every spiritual being, every individual, every idea, and as you work with that, if that person will continue to come to you, if they will continue to work with you, to be faithful with you, in the end you will bring out not only whatever the physical, mental, moral, or financial harmony they want, but you will open up that tight bud which is in everybody. Everyone has a soul, not a separate soul. Each one has the same soul. God is the soul of man. But we as human beings have it like a tightly closed rosebud. It's so tight and so small in us that you can't find it as humans. It is only as you learn to live in the Spirit more and more that when you begin to meditate, you can see and sometimes touch that spot which is called the soul of man. It isn't in their body, it's in their consciousness. And the more that you can touch it, the more it opens as if sunlight were touching that bud, until eventually the person is opened and you have another spiritual being, another spiritual light, another mystic sometimes. Now, only the few, as the Master pointed out, who can keep themselves actually centered in the idea that the only demonstration in which they are ultimately interested in is this God experience. That doesn't make them indifferent to the fact that they want to be healthy today, or that they should have comfortable supply, or that they should have good family relations and so forth. Those are the things that must come along. And anyone who says that they don't think of that, I doubt a little bit myself. But the point is that they must not be centered, and you must not be centered, in the idea that the major point in your mind is getting well or having abundance or these other things. Yes, they are natural, normal, and right. But the main thing is, you must want, you must desire God realization. And you can't get along without it. Now, when that is the case, you will ultimately come to it. When you have your first taste of God, that is when you have released your loved ones. That is, you've released them from fear. Actually, you have a tighter bond with them than you ever have. It is very much like our relationship here. I can assure you of this, that I hold nobody in any bondage here. I hold nobody in any relationship to me here. Each one is free the very moment the class is over to go their way. But this I also tell you, that there is a tighter, closer bond between us than there is between most members of families. You would find that if the occasion ever came when the chips are down, that we probably would do more for each other than we would do for members of our own family, because you can't know at this moment, because you're not tested. There's no reason to be tested. You don't know what love there is between the people who have tasted God, especially if they have tasted God in a common bond of one teaching. You could witness it in the history of every spiritual teacher and those who became the students of that teacher, and then in turn those who became teachers and their students. You find that same close relationship, and yet It is a freeing relationship like this. You don't have to see each other, you don't have to hear from each other, but it's there. And then in a certain moment, which is the right moment, we do see each other or hear from each other, and the bond is as close as if we had been seeing each other every day. Now, we can have that same relationship with our family. We can't as humans, because as humans, we have no love for our family except the human love, which is mostly animal. That isn't a real love at all. There's no such thing as real love in families. There is only animal love, self-love, possession. That's all. It is only when the Spirit of God touches one that they can feel spiritual love for their family. No other way. The human, it's entirely a selfish thing, and you can always tell it. They always have time and money and effort and everything else for their own, but not for the neighbors. It's completely personal. It's completely selfish. Now, that doesn't exist when the Spirit of God touches one. There is a love that springs up for that family that is so complete that you belong to each other and yet separate in the sense that you know each one is a unit with God, and you free them in that. Can human families do that? Very, very seldom. They live in a constant fear for each other, longing for each other, the desire to see each other flesh to flesh. That doesn't come in spiritual love, and yet there is the joy of tabernacling close together. Now, in our classwork, last week and this week, I brought this to your attention. If I had the power, I would do a lot more than call it to your attention. I have the power. That all human life has been made up of two powers, one warring against the other or one overcoming another. In the infinite way itself, it says, you cannot meet a problem on the level of the problem. And I can tell you that in 27 years of this work, I know that that is truth. You cannot meet a cold as a cold. You cannot meet lack as lack. You cannot meet inharmony as inharmony. You have to rise to a higher level. Now we know that that higher level consists of non-resistance. That higher level resists in the ability to sit back and realize, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit. Then realize that Spirit, and something inevitably happens. Always remember this, we demonstrate it only in accord with the depth of our realization. That's number one. Number two, we demonstrate it for others only in the proportion that they themselves are prepared to lay off their physical way of thinking, their mental or mortal way of thinking, and open themselves to the spiritual light. It is always true that those who are the most spiritually attuned are the quickest helped. Those who are continuously either fighting truth or looking at the body to see if it's taking effect, they are the most difficult ones. Those who insist on living their lives the way they always have lived their lives and will not surrender their consciousness, they are the most difficult. They can be helped, they can be healed, and they can be spiritually opened if they have stick-to-itiveness enough to stick with it for a long enough period of time. Very often they haven't. Sometimes they have. My attitude has always been this. I never give up with an individual as long as they will come to me. Never. I will stick with them and stick with them and stick with them as long as they will come to me. Now, It doesn't mean that I'm always in a position to go where they are physically. It doesn't even mean that always I can have them come where I physically am. But there is never a time we can't engage in correspondence, cables, telephones. Some way a contact can always be kept, and I keep it going for as many years as they are willing to stay with me in this work. Now, where you have a starting foundation of this, that nothing can take place without my conscious living in God or oneness with God. Let me put it to you this way again. You haven't come all this distance to see Joel Goldsmith or his home. Not a single bit. Only one thing has brought you here. There is a conscious oneness with God that takes place in my experience. You know it, and you've come to feel it, to experience it, to learn something about it, and carry it away, and that's your only interest in being here. Joel as a man means nothing to you. Joel as a person can't mean anything to you. And if he weren't living in this atmosphere, you wouldn't be here. And you'd have no interest in him. Because you would be on your way to someone who is attracting you by that spiritual contact. Now please remember that in your own experience. As a man and woman, you're only important to a few immediate friends or relatives. That's all. And no other importance in this world. But the very moment that you live from the standpoint of a conscious union with God, you will find people all over the place having an interest in you, actually wanting that which you have, seeking it out, searching for it, asking for it. So, there is nothing that is ever withheld from an individual who lives their life in some kind of God contact. God contact isn't easily achieved, but I do think this, that everybody, whether or not they know it, makes that contact while they are reading, studying, or meditating. They may not know that they make it. They may not have a feeling that they make it, but I am convinced that they do. I'm convinced of that by this. When I first turned to the study of metaphysics, which study was begun in Christian Science, I made no headway whatsoever. And 13 years after my start, I didn't know any more than I knew the first year. I just had no knack of picking up what I read. I had no knack, whatever you might call it, no feeling for it. All I had was the conviction that I would have to keep on, and I did. Oh, I won't say religiously, intermittently. I studied perhaps for 3 or 4 or 5 months and went to church, and then perhaps for 6 months forgot all about it and lived just the ordinary business life. And then something picked me up and I started over again. I might have gone 2 or 3 months this time, I might have gone 8 or 10 months. And then it was the same thing, falling away for months, maybe a year. And so that went on for 13 years. Now, you know, I'm convinced today that I must have made a God contact during that time that held me on the path, or why did I stick without one single bit of good, without one single bit of benefit, without one single bit of understanding? I had a few healings, but that wasn't the real thing that I was after. The real thing I was after didn't come. And yet, I watched this. At the end of 13 years, in one meditation, with one man, my whole life was so completely changed that 24 hours later I was starting to heal. And 1.5 years later, I was a professional practitioner. Can you imagine that in one single few minutes of meditation? Do you not see that that whole 13 years must have been rolling up? A contact must have been made. Something was growing, growing, growing invisibly, like our crops grow in the ground until all of a sudden they begin to peek up above the ground. Now, as I work with students today, and in these last 10 years of teaching, I feel the same way, that those who read or study or hear and are kept at it, they have made and are making some kind of a mild contact that is holding them in line and building them up and building them up, and then in one day, like the 100-year shade that kept up beautifully, and then on its 100th birthday it collapsed completely. And so it is, I'm convinced that the shell of humanhood that we have, with which we are surrounded, in which we are engulfed, that every time we study, every time we meditate, every time we reach out for this thing, it does something to that stone, that rock, and then in one swoop it breaks. Yes, I'm remembering that story now about the rock that a man had to strike 100 times before it cracked and broke, and the question was asked, which stroke did it, the 100th stroke or which? And of course, there's only one answer. It took the whole 100 strokes, but something must have happened with the first one. Otherwise, the second one wouldn't have gone a bit further, and the third and the fourth, until, zoom, it happened. So with us. I have seen too many people read a few books, attend a few services, and then drift away. Not to know that it was only because they hadn't made the contact. Because I've seen too many who have almost hopelessly stuck and stuck and stuck and stuck, and then all of a sudden came into their heritage. Now, there is a God. There is a principle of life. In our individual experience, it has been proven that no matter what the nature of the problem that you bring to me, that if I sit here I'm not thinking of you, and I'm not thinking of your problem. I'm not denying. I'm not affirming. I'm just sitting here, if you want to call it that, waiting on the Lord, or waiting for the Spirit of the Lord God to fall upon me, or enter me. Or I'm sitting here waiting for a realization. Any of these terms, they all mean the same thing. I'm not trying to reach God, because God is already where I am. I'm trying to be still enough so that God can reach through to me. And I have to sit, and I have to wait, and then when my release comes, something has happened. Now, of course, in some cases, an instantaneous healing can happen of a mild thing or a very horrible thing. But other times, it is only the first blow, and I may have to go and have 100 more blows before the particular error yields itself. Well, it seems like it's time to wait a while.